I'm Teresa Coraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. My topic today is responding to a blogger called Librarian, who has been posting long segments of books like Shlomo Sand's The Invention of the Jewish People and Victor Kattan's From Coexistence to Conflict. In this episode, the question that he's looking to answer is, what is the cause of anti-Semitism? He also words the question as, why do some people hate some other groups of people? Although he doesn't have an answer to that question, he still assumes that it's true. In the second half of Logic is Your Friend, I responded to Librarian's post in the Anti-Semitism Reality. Its subtitle reads, "There's much hate towards people that are Jewish. I don't use the term the Jews, nor the Jewish people, because these collectives are not existential. They are instrumentalized to further hate." His post, What This Anti-Semitism Thread is About, has this subtitle: "Can we acknowledge there is anti-Semitism and then investigate what keeps it going? Now, I am not assigning blame, but I wish to see if there's a collective responsibility, or can I undo my part in it?" His index page for our anti-Semitism project is subtitled this way: "A small-sized population claim a certain religious heritage, and they get singled out as a people of scorn. Hate goes dormant, but then comes alive again throughout history. Why is that?" So let's dig into those questions. Let's start with the question of who. As readers know, my first step in every analysis is to define the question and every term within it. Who are we talking about? Librarian states that the Jews, or the Jewish people, is hate speech, instrumentalized anti-Semitism. So the collective hatred can be named, but the people can't. That makes no sense. The word Jew was not coined until the 18th century, yet anti-Semitism has been claimed to be around for 3 millennia. How do we refer to this group of people without a collective identity? There must be something that distinguishes them. I've suggested Yahwist, but it's not worship of a god that is the salient feature. Some identify as secular Jews and secular Zionists. The critical belief is that the person has a blood lineage that is special to God above all other people. I'm going to call Yahweh's chosen people the YahChoPeeps, which is the title of this episode. The next question, what? Librarian identifies the active verb in anti-Semitism as hate and scorn. These are emotions. Labeling a single person, much less millions of people, as irrational and driven by their emotions is to insult them. It says that they are perpetual children, incapable of reason, idiotic. It claims moral superiority in using the word hate. My definition of cold hatred is superiority. It only turns into hot hatred or violence when challenged. The accusation of hatred is an example of hatred. It demeans the character of the other instead of looking at their behavior and asking why. It assumes there is no why. That's just how these people are, unlike the speaker. A rational approach looks at the behaviors on both sides. In the Anti-Semitism Reality, Librarian formats a list of 359 expulsions, with the first 4 biblical. So we can rephrase Librarian's question as, why were YahChoPeeps expelled from different countries and societies around the world over the course of 2 millennia? Why? One answer is supplied by Laurent Guyenot in From Yahweh to Zion. Judophobia is a variety of demonopathy, with the distinction that it is not peculiar to particular races, but is common to the whole of mankind. He quotes from Leon Pinsker, a medical doctor. As a psychic aberration, it is hereditary, and as a disease transmitted for 2,000 years, it is incurable. But maybe you're someone who doesn't believe in demons and incurable hereditary aberrations, presumably requiring the death of the whole of mankind to cure, other than YahChoPeeps. Zionism, the zombie of a dead idea. Another post from Librarian is Zionism and the return to Palestine was a dead idea by the 19th century. He presents compelling evidence that those who identified as Jews didn't want to move to Palestine in the early 1900s. It was forced immigration through pogroms and closing all other borders. From these authors that he cites, British imperialists used the Jews to colonize Palestine for their own geopolitical ambitions. It was Christian Zionists who created Jewish Zionism. Rothschild was hesitant about the idea, but worried that unchecked Jewish immigration would injure the existing British Jewish community. Librarian ends, without British colonialism, there would be no Israel today. So many researchers point to defects in the Jewish character, those toxic ideas of separatism and superiority preserved in biblical text that Jews wholeheartedly imbibe. I acknowledge that toxic ideas are in the Bible, but I doubt that a whole Jewish population is infected by them. They are also in the Christian Bible. Are the Christians infected by them? By the superiority, he writes, yes, and I wholeheartedly agree with the last line. Toxic corners. I asked, could you identify anti-Semitism how you mean it, Librarian? And perhaps who you mean when you say the Jews? I think that you and I agree that there is no unified genetic people that tie back to ancient Judea, but has spread around the world in the last 2 millennia. And I'm certain we agree that no people are genetically disposed to nefarious intentions. The only thing that unifies those who currently identify as Jews is a story. My intent is to show that story is both false and written with nefarious intent, to manipulate those who believe it into nefarious actions. Those stories, without a doubt, are the cause of present-day atrocities. Those who believe the stories need support to recognize they're being manipulated. We agree, I'm sure, that there are present-day atrocities being committed by those who identify as Jews against Palestinians. One of those stories was keeping me awake last night and haunting my dreams. If these are not a people with nefarious intent, and I don't think that's true of anyone, what do you see as the cause? He answered, my investigation is aimed at breaking some of the stereotypes that are attached by people who use the term the Jews. These stereotypes are what I call anti-Semitism, even if they somehow seem positive attributes. I will never use that collective term myself, which doesn't exist. All of civilizations are built on various stories. That's no different for anyone. Most of those stories have their toxic corners. Some are more blatant than others. I like to look at individual people as life affirmative and life denial, meaning those that build on something and those that destroy most anything. Guyenot says that his book is a critique of toxic ideas, and that lies come first. It's only by exposing the lies that the violence will end. I don't exactly agree. He exposes plenty of lies, but on Unz it fires up his commenters into even more disdain or more sureness of their pre-existing anti-Semitism. I see him as building hate. I don't say intentionally, but that is the result. Well-meaning authors have to be cognizant of how their work is being received. It is not a path I would choose. Western populations may think that world peace will bring prosperity to all, but it won't. Your prosperity is based on world turmoil, and the more the better. This is the ugly truth, and we are all in denial about it. This is the cause you seek. The Balfour Declaration was Jewish hate because it manipulated the Jewish for purely British colonial ends. It seems to me that Librarian is saying no generality can be made about the Jews, even to use the term. But there can be no questioning of anti-Semitism, which means anyone who talks about the Jews as a group, even in positive terms. I don't think anyone who reads me denies the role of the West in creating world turmoil, nor the centrality of the City of London and British imperialism. I don't see those as mutually exclusive with the complicity of the YahChoPeeps. Wherefore the Balfour? Was the Balfour a manipulation of the Jews by British imperialists? I commented, the question it leaves open is who instigated the Balfour Declaration? Your premise is that it was specifically named British imperialists with political motives. They initiated it as a bribe in the hopes that Jewish Zionists would use their influence on the side of Britain in the war. While British figures are named, and you don't assume that the man or woman on the London street shared in those manipulations, it's juxtaposed against the Jews, as in the Jews showed little inclination to migrate, showing they had no interest in the Balfour. The Jews are seen as a people without leadership or elites. No political or imperial motives are attributed to individual Jews. The first victims of the Balfour were not the Palestinians, but the Germans. They were betrayed from within Germany. That's confirmed by historical documents presented after the end of the war in order to lay claim to Palestine when land was being divvied up. Judea called itself a nation when it declared war on Germany in 1933. That's not something that can be done without an internal authority system. Here is a lengthy quote from Benjamin Freedman's speech. That whole quote will be on thirdparadigm.substack.com, along with Julius Schoolofish's link, where he has just posted all the different segments of Benjamin Freedman's speech. But in essence, the part that I quoted says the Zionist in Germany, who represented Zionists from Eastern Europe, went to the British War Cabinet. And this is during World War I, before the U.S. has entered it, and when Germany is winning. And they, Zionists, told England, we will guarantee to bring the United States into the war as your ally, to fight with you on your side if you will promise us Palestine after you win the war. And Freedman says that he has documents that can back this up and that those are available to anyone who has the curiosity to find them. Girls will be gold. Librarian replied, that's quite a write-up you gave to Benjamin Freedman. He must have been convincing. Wikipedia says he is a Holocaust denier and vocal anti-Zionist. I scanned his speech. For me, it was pretty crude and full of assertions. He claims Judea declared war on Germany in 1933, but most of the speech is about before World War I. So he then goes through and challenges me to name the Jews who can actually get the U.S. to enter the war. And then he goes into the protocols of the elders of Zion and how that was a fraud. And there are many people who are on my Substack who I know can refute these things, so I suggest going there. He ends by saying, anyone who claims that Jews run the world and we will deliver any policy that you desire if you just give us Palestine is really the epitome of idiocy. not to say the epitome of anti-Semitism. Please see my post number 9 for more clarity. So, Librarian begins by calling me gullible and ends by calling my ideas the epitome of idiocy, not to say the epitome of anti-Semitism. For contrast, here are segments of comments Nephihotep made to Librarian. First, I would say that the key to recognize and recollect the events that may have taken place in recent times is linguistics, such as the real name of the Hebrew, Habaru or Haparu or Aparu. Semitism itself is a system of slaves and masters from the most ancient attestations. The Canaanites were bequeathed by Noah to Shem to be his slaves. To be anti-Shemite is to be against this system of slaves and masters. Usually, those stories were written long after the events they describe, yet are used to justify the claims of empire and the construction of a control prison called hierarchy, etymology from Greek roots, hieros, sacred, and archine, rule or order. My theory is that these Habru were the same ones known in Samaria as Sagasu, meaning trespassers, because they were wanderers that were not welcome. They became the shepherds the Egyptians had reason to fear. That includes their very secretive parasitic culture, which also includes its own psychopathy. It's basically a cult. One lady posted a very strongly worded article in 2016 about why she left the cult. I believe that people are essentially morally equal. When bad things happen, systems are to blame, and those can be changed. The reason for the emphasized violence and superiority in the Hebrew stories is because the whole story of Shemitism is one about masters and slaves. Hating someone or something is like taking poison and expecting the other person to die. Originally, with barter, there was always a slight advantage from one side or another. This imbalance was only there to keep the relationship of exchange going. One person would get a barter gain, bargain. The other would try to get the upper hand next time. However, there was no third party or usurer. Librarian's response began, "Hello, Nephihotep, and thanks for introducing me to your stimulating research. I'd like to thank you for your comprehensive reply." And he continues in respectful terms, which may not have been the case if those ideas had been credited. A nation, a genealogy, a historical narrative, or a religion. In his post, Every Human Being Has a Story, Librarian presents the intro of Shlomo Sand's The Invention of the Jewish People. Shlomo says that Judaism is an important belief culture and appealing religion that spread widely until the triumphant rise of its proselytizing rivals, Christianity and Islam, and then, despite humiliation and persecution, succeeded in surviving into the modern era. So he places the locus of anti-Semitism in other people, not just institutions of power, who have an irrational bias and hostility against others who worship differently. But he also places the locus of the problem within a Judaism that confuses itself as a nation, a genealogy, and a historical narrative rather than as a religion. I look at Yahwism as a belief in a sociopathic God with a twisted morality where ethnic purity justifies the most morally reprehensible behaviors. It's appealing in the way that superiority always is, whether that's chosen people or American exceptionalism. There is no common ethnicity, only people who've been taught that it's their right to rule over others. I'd like to end with a new rule. To find the good in heresies, read their detractors. To find the bad in religions, read their scriptures. Often all that still exists of a burned heretical scripture is the refutation against them. Yet, reading between the lines, you can still tell that they're loving and inclusive. On the flip side, one of my challenges to you is to open the Old Testament at random and see if you can find a page without something morally revolting. If your scripture celebrates deceit, enslavement, dismemberment, rape, incest, imperialism, and genocide down to the suckling babe, why look any further for why societies would evict the YahChoPeeps? On the last page of From Yahweh to Zion, after 490 pages of evidence, Laurent Guyenot concludes, as a collective entity, the Jewish people has always behaved like a sociopath among other people. Many Jews, of course, have resisted that collective mind frame, but most have been bred into it for generations, not just by their parents, but by their tribal god, the fake Yahweh. Today's Jews cannot be blamed for having inherited as sacred text the most extraordinary hoax in all human history. As children of a psychopathic God, they are its first victims. But although no one is responsible for the faith he has grown up with, everyone at some point should take responsibility for it. And then I have a segue for those who are curious. In the same post where I answered Librarian, called Logic is Your Friend, I also responded to someone who called himself Winston Smith. He tricked me into responding again because he reincarnated as Thought Criminal 1984. That assumes this is a he and not an insult bot. Here's our exchange on my last video, The Great Displacement. Thought Criminal. Your State of the Union speech at the end, that sounds lovely, but does this only occur after you forcefully remove the homeless people from your area? It's strange watching you claim to be caring on one hand and then on the other talk about the forceful removal of those you deem unworthy of that same community spirit and love. I wrote back, where do I claim to be caring? Thought Criminal. To me, the purpose of government is not to take care of people, but to enable people to take care of themselves and their own. You can't have it both ways. If caring means providing for other people's needs, how many people do you take care of? How many are you capable of taking care of? All that caring means to you is shifting the responsibility to provide for others onto other people. Isn't that the opposite of actually caring for them in any tangible way? If you take the term caring as anything other than lip service, you first need to limit the people you take responsibility for. Taking care of one person responsibly, as in raising a child, is a difficult task. Instead of supporting parents in that task, our system forces them to serve the rich. My system gives families and communities the means to provide for their own. Your system shirks that responsibility and places it on others. Thought Criminal replied, a sister and brotherhood that takes care of each other, except if you're homeless. Then you, Teresa, or your Commonwealth will forcibly remove you from her area. Come on, Teresa, how come you're so ardent in your refusal to see the hypocrisy and dichotomy of these two positions? I wrote back, you never answered the question of how many people you physically take responsibility for. How many sisters and brothers do you care for? And who would be homeless if you hadn't taken them in? Your logic and style of accusation seem eerily similar to Winston Smith. Thought Criminal wrote, I have children, but have taught them to be physically responsible for themselves. I still provide care for them, obviously, as they are children. I will continue to provide the required care, guidance, and knowledge so that they themselves can take care of themselves completely and then hopefully pass that on to their children. You're still ignoring the reality that you make claims of being caring and anti-superiority on one hand, and espousing dictatorial ideas and machinations on the other. I'm not accusing you of anything, Teresa. I'm pointing out the absurdly hypocritical and antithetical points you continually espouse. The fact you don't address these points and instead obfuscate the conversation highlights your unwillingness to confront the cognitive dissonance of these two positions. I wrote back, okay, I'm going to address you as Winston since you're clearly the person I already made a whole episode about. So you and I care for others who are our children. You don't take responsibility for random strangers who are homeless, correct? Please find and quote where I claim to be caring. If I thought I was more caring than other people, I'd be claiming moral superiority, yes? I don't claim that. I believe that everyone has the same capability that you and I have to take care of our own children if the system was changed. But I've already been through pointing out your insults. It clearly had no effect. Thought Criminal replied, I've already pointed you to where you made the claim your system will allow everyone to be more caring. You make statements about those in Palestine and their ordeal, showing you care for others. Then make statements such as, I'd ship the homeless back to where they came from. Those two ways of thinking are absolutely antithetical to one another. This isn't about claiming moral superiority. You're claiming actual superiority, as in your life in the area you live in has more value than the homeless people you want to ship somewhere else. If you can't see that, I can't help you. I'm not sure whether you do think you care for others more or not. However, you clearly have a hard time dealing with genuine constructive dialogue. You also clearly have trouble being logically or rationally consistent in your ideas and principles. You also like to ascribe straw man arguments to other people rather than address their points of criticism. I answered, saying that my system would allow communities and families to care for their own is the exact opposite of saying that I care more than others. I believe those in Palestine are perfectly capable of taking care of themselves if a psychopathic system wasn't killing them and stealing their land, and maybe those people should be sent back to where they came from. Why do you feel that communities and families have no desire to care for their own children, even if they had the means? My system gives them the means, but you think it's okay that they've put their mentally ill and substance abusers on buses, as is termed Greyhound therapy. And why do you assume that there are no homeless that would come back here? The value of every place is in its people. You say that those who were born here have no right to come back, no right to live here. But anyone who comes from elsewhere to live on the streets has to be provided housing because it's okay for their communities to evict them. But I'll let you have the last word. Have at it. Thought Criminal said, You're actually displaying selfish and narcissistic tendencies. I wonder why your marriage ended in divorce. And that, my friends, is why I tell women that logic is your friend. And to see that first discussion with Winston and Librarian, here is Logic is Your Friend. And this is the great displacement on how people are being sent out of their own communities so that other people can be brought in. Thank you for watching.